Honor and shame in the New Testament. Honor and shame is one of the ethical systems that as human we have developed. Mainly this is practiced in the Eastern culture, around Mediterranean, Asia and Africa. And the other ethical system that is well known is the innocent guilt culture, which is practiced in the West, countries like America, Europe, Australia. And those ethical systems really came because of the fall. And I think what we need to understand is that the scripture is written in a culture of honor and shame. And to understand the scripture better, we must go and understand what happened at the fall. At the fall, our conscience became aware of our uncleanness and our ungodliness, and fear and shame came in. So the idea of this ethical system is how can we present ourselves before God and others in a better light. So here we can see in Genesis chapter 3 verse 1, we can see the seed of doubt has been planted in the human race, and also fear and shame has entered the human race here. So we can conclude that shame and doubt and fear, the Genesis is really in the book of Genesis. And what we need to understand is that to understand the scripture right, we need to understand who is the historical Jesus and what is the culture of the people that were living during that time. So we need to know that Jesus, as we see him, know him in terms of his appearance, what he is, and what historically is supposed to look like. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to give you an overview of the presentation. As you can see here, we've got an iceberg and also a hermeneutical lens, just to show that the scripture is written in the Mediterranean honor shame culture, but we try to understand it from innocent guilt culture, and we need that hermeneutical lens to understand the beliefs, the attitude, and the behavior of the people during that time. Let's get to the innocent guilt culture which we live in, and in that is that if we didn't do something that we believe that people have accused us of, we fight for it. And on the other side, in the shame honor culture, if we believe that, or if people believe that we did something we didn't do, we are shamed or dishonored, and it's very hard to get that honor back. We need to understand this society, honor shame society, is very competitive. There is 4 reasons that's been put forward here. One is that because honor is pervaded or seen as something that is supreme during those ancient times, and also still now. And the other thing is that those goods or honors exist in a limited supply, so there is greater competition for it. And on the third, there is envy for those people who do have those virtues, or they do have this honor. And lastly is put in that it's just generally the society is very competitive. And lastly, he it says also that in multicultural arenas, people honor different things. So, for example, you can see that the Romans honor war or worshipping the emperor, while the Jews honor being worshipping only Yahweh. The Greco-Romans also, Xenophon gives us an evidence here that the Athenians excel in loving honor above all things. And the Romans also, Augustine puts it down, he says that they burn to possess honor and glory. So we can see that the culture is completely immersed in this value. And also Josephus from the first century Jews tell us that the victims, they were quite silent even when they are tortured to show honor. And here are some of the words that are put in the scripture, that we find in the scripture to describe honor and shame. And now let us look at the attitude that we have, those people who do live in the West. We are individualistic, we are justice orientated, we are a small power distance. That is just to explain that the power, ideally we want those who are powerful, and those ones who don't have power, the distance to be small. We tolerate deviation in ideas. We respect individual opinions. We are more based on policies, and we are more democratic in terms of decisions compared to the honor and shame culture. We are collective in honor and shame culture and honor orientated, and there is high power distance. Ideally, we want maximum distance between those who do have power and those who don't have power. And they seek conformity when it comes to honor and shame, and the status of membership is essential. Some honors are ascribed at birth because of family ties, others are achieved as virtues, and it is autocratic decision making. The other one to look at is behavior from honor and shame. So, when it comes to behavior, we constantly see this in the scripture that there's constant public fight, verbal combat, for, or you can call it verbal assassination, that happens daily. So you have to prepare yourself every time you go out to defend your honor and your family's honor. And there is a proposal put forward here. We can see that there is 4 steps to this game or to this battle. One is that there's a claim of words, and the second one is there is a challenge to that claim that you put forward. And third, you have to defend your claim. And finally, the public decides who is a successful party that should be awarded. And we're going to take 3 scripture verses from Matthew, Mark, and Luke and look at how they've been put forward. So I've kind of put it together in a different color code here. So the green is the claim, and the red is the challenge, and the yellow is the defense. And lastly, we're going to see that public verdict going on. So here in Matthew chapter 12, we can see that, Jesus going into the synagogue, and there was a man with a shriveled hand, and he asked the question, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? This is a question that they asked Jesus. So they kind of challenged Jesus. You can see that there's a challenge. Now, Jesus is going to defend this. He said to them, if any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on a Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? So you can see that he's debating with them. And right at the end, he heals the man. He says, stretch out your hand, and the guy get healed. And all the people were astonished and said, could this be the son of David? So we can see clearly who the winner is. The crowd is absolutely cheering for Jesus. The next one we see is Luke chapter 10. Here we can see James and John and asking Jesus if they could sit on the right and the left hand side when he comes back in glory. So they kind of putting forward a claim. And Jesus is challenging their claim, and he says, can you drink the cup I drink, or the baptism that I'll be baptized with? And they kind of give a short one. They say, we can. And Jesus challenged them again. And right at the end, it says that when the other 10 disciples heard of what James and John has asked, they were indignant. They were furious. So here you can see that James and John losing this battle. And finally, we can see this in Luke chapter 13, that this put forward, the claim is being put forward by Jesus. And so the claim is that here on the Sabbath day, there's a lady that has a spirit that crippled her for 18 years. And there are the Jews, the Pharisees were challenging Jesus in the synagogue, saying that there are 6 days to work. Do not heal anyone on this day. This is a Sabbath. And Jesus is challenging their claim, and he says, you hypocrites, if you do have an ox or a donkey, if it falls into a, if it needs water, will you not give it? And this is a woman who's been crippled for 18 years. Is she not a child or a daughter of Abraham and deserves to be healed? And right at the end, it says that his opponents were humiliated. So this is a public display that constantly happens through the scripture. That in honor and shame culture is all about having that public, defending publicly the honor that you do have or the claims that you do make. And we can bring this one back home. Lately, the news have been on Barnaby Joyce and his adulterous affair. And I think we can compare this with his Herod the Tetrarch. the culture, completely two different culture. Herod is in honor and shame culture. Barnaby Joyce is in innocent guilt culture. The accusation is the same, it's adultery. And the grounds they've been accused upon is that moral failure for Barnaby Joyce and for Herod is unlawful, as John the Baptist puts it. And the attitude is that Barnaby says that private matters should be kept private, while Herod says he held grudge, according to Mark chapter 6, and consequently Barnaby Joyce lost his position, while Herod killed John the Baptist. At the bottom, bottom of the line is that they're both hypocrites. So, what the message is that Jesus is not really concerned about whether you live in innocent guilt culture or honor shame culture. At the end of the day, if hypocrisy is there, that's what Jesus is trying to get at. All right. So, in conclusion, why does this really matter if it is honor, shame, or guilt, innocent culture? Well, understanding these dynamics will help us to understand the scripture better. And the second thing is that understanding the honor shame culture will help us to communicate the gospel more effectively. So, thank you so much for listening.